I'm a 23-year-old woman, and this started the Sunday morning my father didn't wake up. I had been living with him in the house I grew up in, just the two of us for the past 3 years. I paid half the bills, did all the groceries, helped him in and out of the bath, changed his medicine trays when his memory started slipping. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. He never asked me to stay. I just did. It made sense. My older brother, Declan, had moved out when I was 13. We weren't close. He visited maybe once or twice a year, mostly around holidays or when Dad hinted at wanting to update the will. He always left with something. Tools from the shed, an antique clock, boxes labeled Mom's keepsakes he claimed meant a lot, but never seemed to unpack. The funeral was quiet. We buried Dad on a Thursday. Declan stood next to me like a stranger. The reception afterward was just cold sandwiches, quiet murmurs, and long stares. He pulled me aside before he left and said we'd need to sort the house stuff quickly. I asked if we could wait a bit. He nodded but gave no real answer. 5 days later, I stopped at the store on the way home to pick up toilet paper and soup. When I got back, my key didn't work. There was a new lock on the door. Declan was sitting on the porch rail like he'd been waiting for me. No words, just a manila envelope in his hand. He handed it over and turned to unlock the door behind him. I didn't even have time to ask what was going on. Inside the envelope was a check for $2,000 and a printed letter. The letter said the house was now legally his and I needed to vacate immediately. I knocked. I yelled. Nothing. The curtains didn't move. He didn't come back out. I drove to a friend's apartment that night and crashed on her pull-out couch. I didn't cry. I didn't explain everything. I just told her I needed a few days. That turned into 2 weeks. I called a lawyer after the third day, someone who did family estates on the side, but the minute she asked about an updated will, I knew. There wasn't one. Dad had promised me he'd revise it after Mom died, but he never did. Everything defaulted to Declan by law. I tried calling Declan once, straight to voicemail. After that, I stopped. There was nothing more to say. I moved into a basement studio I found through a friend of a friend. The floor sloped and smelled like mildew. The stove clicked for 2 full minutes before it lit. The heater buzzed like it was running on old batteries. But it had a door that locked, and I could afford it with the job I had just started, overnights at a 24-hour diner off the freeway. It wasn't much. I mopped floors, cleared trays, cleaned grease traps, and stacked dishes until my hands cracked. Every dollar I made went toward rent, bus fare, and frozen meals. I didn't tell anyone in my family what happened. I didn't want to hear the tired, well, that's how the law works or worse, pity. I didn't need sympathy. I needed footing. I found a used laptop for $80 at a pawn shop, brought it home, and used the free Wi-Fi from the coffee shop across the street. I spent every spare minute clicking through articles about design software, watching tutorials, and taking free certification courses on coding and digital marketing. I didn't even know what I was building toward yet. I just knew I wasn't staying in that basement forever. Once a week, I passed my old house on the bus. I'd look out the window for a second when we turned the corner, long enough to see if the lights were on or if the car was still in the driveway. He'd replaced the garden with concrete and paved the front walkway like it was some kind of fortress. All the windows were now tinted. There was no warmth left in that place, no sign of the home it used to be. Just a shell, cleaner and colder. I saved every receipt from those early months, every bill, every dollar I spent, every bus ticket and grocery stub, not for taxes, just to keep track. Just so I could look back one day and say that's where it started. I found work doing digital design on the side. Nothing big, flyers, menus, local event posters. I did it under a different name and never told anyone I knew. I didn't need recognition. I needed distance. Declan didn't reach out again. There was no apology, no message, no explanation. The last time I saw him was that day on the porch, me holding a manila envelope, him walking back inside like it was just another errand. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't beg. I stood there for a minute, then walked away. That's when I made the promise to myself. If he thought he could take my home and bury me under it, I'd make something he couldn't touch, something he couldn't stop, something bigger than both of us. The diner was just off the highway, wedged between a gas station and a motel with flickering signs. The floor tiles stuck to your shoes. The coffee was burnt more often than not, but it was open 24/7, and they were hiring with no questions asked. I started with the midnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. My job was mostly cleaning. I mopped floors 3 times a night, scrubbed fryers until my arms ached, wiped tables sticky from syrup and spilled ketchup. The manager liked things spotless, and I was too new to push back. The pay wasn't good, but I barely touched it. Rent was paid the first day of the month, and I bought food that didn't need refrigeration, instant noodles, canned beans, peanut butter. Any leftovers at the end of my shift, I packed up and took home. One of the line cooks let me have toast and eggs on nights when the kitchen was slow. During my breaks, I sat in the back corner with my beat-up laptop, squatting on the motel's Y. I signed up for every free design and coding course I could find, tutorials on Illustrator, YouTube videos on HTML, blog posts about brand marketing. I didn't know exactly what I was aiming for, just that I needed a way out that wasn't tied to someone else's kitchen. 6 months in, I found a job posting on a local community board. A small app firm needed a part-time assistant for their design team, no degree required, just a basic portfolio and a willingness to learn. I used every scrap of work I'd built from tutorials to make a fake project page and sent it in. They called me in for an interview the next day. I worked the diner shift, showered at the gym, changed in a bathroom stall, and showed up 20 minutes early. I got the job. It paid less than the diner at first, but I didn't care. I took both shifts. Diner at night, app firm during the day. I slept on the bus or during lunch breaks. I didn't tell anyone at the office I worked nights. I didn't tell anyone at the diner I had a second job. My manager at the firm was young but sharp. She threw me tasks that were way above my pay grade: client mockups, logo revisions, debugging front-end code. I never turned anything down. I stayed late, came in early, and asked every question I could without sounding stupid. Within 8 months, I was moved from assistant to junior designer. The raise meant I could quit the diner. I stayed 2 more weeks to help train someone else, then walked out for the last time at sunrise with grease on my shoes and $40 extra in tips stuffed in my pocket. I kept my apartment, even though I could afford better. The heater still buzzed, and the tap water ran rusty for the first 10 seconds. But it was quiet. Nobody asked questions, and I didn't need to explain where I'd been. My freelance work started to grow. I designed menus for restaurants, business cards for realtors, social posts for boutique shops. One of my first clients was a woman who made candles out of her garage. She paid me in product and gave my name to 3 other people within the week. 2 years in, I registered my own business. I chose a name that didn't use mine. I didn't want any trace of me online unless I put it there myself. I took night courses in business law and accounting, built my own website, booked client meetings between office hours and freelance deadlines. Once a year, I drove past the old house, never stopped, just parked across the street with the engine running. The porch light was always off. The windows were darker than I remembered. He'd ripped out the garden and poured concrete all the way to the curb. No toys, no chairs, no signs of kids or anyone else living there. Just Declan's car in the driveway, same spot every year. 5 years after he kicked me out, I bought a duplex across town. 2 units, both occupied. I kept it quiet. No announcement, no ribbon cutting. Just 2 leases signed and a fresh coat of paint. I handed the property management off to a small firm and let them collect rent. Year 6, I moved into an office space with glass doors and a shared lobby. Hired 2 designers and a part-time assistant. I still came in first and left last. I didn't decorate much, just a desk, a coffee maker, and a framed architectural drawing of the old library downtown. It had been my escape when I was a kid. I hadn't gone back yet. My name was finally on something that couldn't be taken with a manila envelope and a cheap pen. But I wasn't chasing recognition. I wasn't building to impress him or make him look small. I was building because it was mine now. Every invoice, every project, every contract signed, I stacked them like bricks, not to build walls, to lay foundations. Because this story wasn't about how high I could go. It was about what I'd reclaim once I got there. 10 years after my father passed, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring out, but something about the area code made me pick up. It was a realtor, asking if I was interested in a property hitting the market soon. She read out the address. It was the house I was kicked out of, the one Declan had claimed like it was a prize. I didn't answer her question. I hung up, opened my laptop, and pulled the public property records. The house had been refinanced twice in the past 5 years. The most recent filing was a notice of default. I cross-checked with the local clerk's office, confirmed it was behind on payments and headed straight for foreclosure. He had managed to hold on this long by digging himself into deeper and deeper debt. Records showed he took out a second mortgage just 2 years after I'd been kicked out, then another line of credit. On paper, the house looked stable. Underneath, it was all cracked tile and sinking beams, just like the place I started in. I reached back out to the realtor using a newly registered LLC. No name, no connection to me. I submitted a cash offer well below market value with a 7-day close and no inspections. The kind of offer that looks shady to most sellers, but to a bank bleeding equity, it's a relief. 4 days later, the documents were signed. I was the legal owner. I didn't go there. I didn't even drive by. I hired a firm to handle everything. They issued a 30-day vacate notice, complete with legal signatures and stamped instructions. I told them to keep all communication one-sided. If Declan tried to respond, they were to acknowledge receipt and nothing more. 29 days in, I parked across the street around noon. The sun hit the driveway where our garden used to be. A moving truck sat idling, back open, half filled with boxes and loose furniture wrapped in old blankets. Declan came out wearing a flannel shirt and track pants. He was thinner, hair longer, grayer. He didn't seem in a rush, just walked back and forth, pointing at things, adjusting straps. There was no one else there helping him. He stood on the porch once, staring at the door like it still had something to offer him. Then he turned, walked inside, and didn't come out for 15 minutes. When he reappeared, the truck was full. He climbed into the driver's seat and pulled out without looking back. I gave the keys to a property manager the next day. The listing went live within the week as a fully serviced executive rental, quiet neighborhood, modern appliances, smart security system already installed. They had tenants booked for a 6-month lease by the end of the month. The money wasn't the point. I could have flipped the house, gutted it, or knocked it down and paved it over, but I didn't. I let it stand. I let it become a line item in a business portfolio. Just another asset. The porch still creaked when you stepped on it. I made sure they didn't fix that part. 3 weeks after the move out, a utilities technician found a box wedged behind the water heater in the basement. Inside were a few old bills, a cracked mug, and a Polaroid of me and Dad from when I was about 10. We were planting tomatoes in the yard. My hands were covered in dirt. He was smiling. I didn't throw it away. I sent the photo to a restoration studio, had it cleaned up and scanned, printed 2 copies. One I kept in a file drawer. The other went into a frame, face down in my office drawer, not on display. Just close enough to find if I ever needed to remember what real roots looked like. Declan didn't contact me. I didn't expect him to. I had already made sure he couldn't reach me, not directly, not legally, not even through middlemen. My name was nowhere he'd recognize. Every signature on every paper traced back to corporate holdings, not blood. The week after tenants moved in, I drove past once more, late evening, just before dusk. Porch light was on. A small potted plant sat by the front door, curtains open. Life inside, not memory. I didn't stop. Instead, I kept driving until I reached a piece of commercial land my agency had just closed on. It was part of a mixed-use block that would include retail, co-working space, and affordable rentals. My team was leading the design. I had personally signed off on the final renderings. I stood there with the blueprint rolled under my arm, watching crews unload scaffolding near the foundation site. The same soil my brother once thought belonged to him now sat under steel and concrete I owned, by contract, by deed, and by the sheer fact that I outlasted him. Buying that house back wasn't about revenge. It was about flipping the story. He once handed me an envelope on a porch and turned away. Now I had handed him his own eviction, sealed, delivered, and silent. 3 months after I took back the house, I learned Declan had moved into a rental on the edge of a struggling neighborhood across town. The place used to be decent years ago. Quiet streets, modest homes, but now most properties had overgrown lawns and sagging porches. His building was one of those faded duplexes, where the paint peels in long strips and the mailbox hangs open. He'd picked up a clerical job at a small distribution company. Nothing like the project management position he held before. This one didn't require a degree, just typing and sorting paper. I didn't dig for those details. They came up through property records, job listings, and some routine searches tied to the business entities I managed. I kept tabs, quietly. Around the same time, a colleague from my early startup days reached out. She was launching a redevelopment fund aimed at revitalizing neglected blocks, focusing on sustainable housing and mixed-use commercial builds. We grabbed coffee. She was looking for investors. I agreed to back the next 3 phases, on the condition I could help identify the neighborhoods. We started with 5 lots. 3 were vacant. 1 was condemned. The last one stood directly next to Declan's rental. Within weeks, construction permits were filed. Crews showed up just after sunrise. Dumpsters dropped. Concrete mixers parked. Scaffolding wrapped around the buildings like ivy. The noise wasn't constant, it was strategic, just enough to be noticed. Then came the offer. Declan's landlord was approached by our acquisitions partner with a cash proposal well over market value. He signed within the week. No haggling, no warning. 60-day vacate notice. Official. Signed. Taped to every door in the building. Declan had nowhere else lined up. A mutual acquaintance, someone who knew us both back in school, mentioned that Declan was growing suspicious. He believed someone was targeting him. He tried to rally the other tenants to push back on the redevelopment plans, but no one joined him. Some were excited about the rising property value. Others had already found better places to go. He packed up and left on day 59. That night, I sent instructions to freeze all construction activity on those lots for 3 weeks. The neighborhood went silent. No noise. No lights. No trucks. I learned later he'd found a room above a mechanic's garage on the far end of the city. One of those setups where the living space is just drywall and pipes above the shop floor. He was paying week to week. No lease. No parking spot. Just 4 walls and a shared bathroom down the hall. Meanwhile, our company finalized a contract to install smart home systems in every new unit being developed on his old block. Automated climate, security cams, smart locks, and mobile app controls. Our logo would be stamped on every welcome packet given to incoming residents. Declan didn't know I was behind it. He wouldn't have recognized the LLC name or connected it to the coffee shop meetings I used to take down the street. But I didn't need recognition. I just needed him to feel the shift, to know the ground he stood on could disappear at any moment. I wasn't destroying him. I was remapping the city, 1 block at a time, and making sure that wherever he landed, the echo of my footsteps followed just behind. Declan always liked to play the part of the devoted son. At gatherings, he'd bring up old stories and moments, exaggerating just enough to keep up the image. He'd talk about how much Dad had taught him, how he planned to write a book someday about the lessons passed down. Most people nodded along. No one questioned it. He never mentioned that he barely visited, or that he left everything behind when he emptied the house, including our father's journals, which he never even looked for. I found them in the garage rafters when I had the place cleared for rental. A worn cardboard box stuffed behind a broken cabinet, water damaged, mold on some pages, but still readable. There were at least 10 spiral-bound notebooks, some yellowed, some falling apart at the edges. The pages weren't filled with deep philosophy or dramatic life advice. They were grocery lists, project sketches, gardening notes, memories about students he'd mentored, a few scribbled letters he never sent. One entry was just a list of books he wanted to reread. Another had a rough floor plan for turning the garage into a workshop, something he never got around to. I scanned every page, cleaned them up digitally, and backed them up on 3 separate drives. Then I spent the next few months contacting people who'd known him, neighbors, old co-workers, a few of his former students who had written him letters after graduation. I hired a ghostwriter to help shape everything into a manuscript under a pseudonym. We worked through it page by page, adding in stories people had shared, matching them to his notes. It turned into a portrait of who he really was, not a perfect man, but a consistent one. Thoughtful, quiet, steady. Nothing like the version Declan had sold to people over drinks. The book was titled What He Left Behind, published under a pen name. It wasn't glossy, no dramatic reveal, just the truth. I published it under a pen name and submitted it anonymously to 5 small publishers. 1 picked it up. The print run was modest, but enough to circulate. A local bookshop ordered copies for a spring showcase at the town center. I sent free copies to the high school where Dad used to volunteer. 2 teachers added it to their classroom reading list. The town library stocked 5 copies and set 1 aside for the local history section. I didn't attend the showcase, but someone I knew did, and they said it got people talking. Old names were mentioned. Photos passed around. A few people said it felt like finally seeing the real version of a man they'd only known in pieces. A month later, Declan showed up at the library asking who had written it. The librarian didn't tell him. She didn't know. He tried to brush it off, told people the book was someone's imagination. But the scans of our father's handwriting were on nearly every other page, dated, signed, and matched to entries found in the original notebooks. He couldn't erase that. He didn't know I'd also sent a signed copy to the city archive, where they logged the donation under a preservation project for local family histories. I never claimed the work. No author bio, no interviews, no acknowledgements. I didn't need anyone to know it was me. It was never about proving Declan wrong. It was about making sure the version he used to build his image didn't get to be the only one left standing. A year after the book started making quiet rounds through the town, Declan lost another job. His department had been merged with another, and he was part of the first wave of layoffs. No severance, no transition role, just a generic notice and a box to clear his desk. He started selling things online, mostly secondhand tools, some of which had once belonged to Dad. A few were still marked with old masking tape labels from our garage. I recognized the names and dates written in my father's handwriting. I bought several under an alias, had them shipped to a P.O. box tied to one of my holding accounts. I cleaned them up, repackaged them, and donated them directly to the high school's vocational program. The shop teacher sent out a thank you note to all donors. I wasn't listed. His girlfriend left around the same time. They had been together for a few years, long enough to share rent and holiday cards. But she moved out quickly. According to someone who still followed her on social media, she was already seeing someone else before the lease ended. He started showing up at the bar near his old rental, the kind of place with flickering lights and half-off beer nights. I spotted him once while walking to my car after a meeting in the area. He stood near the door, slightly hunched, same coat from 5 winters ago. Around that time, I made a donation to a community center 2 blocks away. They were expanding their job training program and needed tech equipment. My firm covered the costs for the new computer lab, 10 workstations, 3 instructors, and an outreach manager. Declan tried launching a podcast. The name was something vague about growth and mindset. He uploaded 2 short episodes using basic gear and a tinny mic. The views were low, reviews even lower. He emailed a few people for cross-promotion, including names I recognized from old startup circles. No one replied. Most had moved on, and he hadn't stayed in touch. Without a car, he started missing interviews. Bus routes didn't line up. He skipped a few second-round calls. Eventually, he stopped applying altogether. His landlord raised the rent, and Declan couldn't keep up. He moved in with an old college acquaintance, someone who had a small 1-bedroom and offered him the couch. They weren't close, just someone he had kept numbers with over the years. That acquaintance, by coincidence, applied to a role at my company 2 months later. I didn't realize the connection until his interview came up during a staffing meeting. He performed well. After his first few projects, he stood out. I nudged his promotion forward behind the scenes, pushed for him to take on more client-facing work, and ensured he had resources the others didn't. A few weeks later, I was reviewing hiring reports when I saw Declan's name on an application. He'd applied for a temp role in the support department, a desk job with basic admin work, no benefits, and minimal visibility. Resume was short, just a list of former roles and vague bullet points. I forwarded the file to HR, no edits, no opinion, just a note at the bottom, reviewed they didn't call him back. There was no interference, no deletion, no memo sent around, just a system that kept moving with or without him. His name was there 1 minute, then gone. Not because someone took him down, because no one needed to lift him up. 10 years after the night I stood outside my locked childhood home with nowhere to go, I received a formal letter from the town's historical society. They were organizing a ceremony to honor individuals who had contributed to the community's redevelopment and cultural preservation. My name was listed among the honorees. So was my father's. The event was scheduled at the renovated town library. The new community room, funded quietly through an anonymous trust I had set up, now carried my father's full name on a bronze plaque by the entrance. It was the only request I made when I covered the entire cost of the renovation. I arrived early that evening. The building looked nothing like it did when I was a kid, new lighting, clean shelves, restored murals along the ceiling. A librarian recognized me from years ago and handed me something they had saved, my old library card, signed in my father's handwriting. It had been laminated and placed behind glass at the circulation desk. During the reception, I met a local teacher who had added what he left behind to her curriculum for a unit on local history. She said her students asked questions about the journal pages and sometimes stayed late after class to read more, never knowing who the author truly was. I donated a portrait I'd commissioned of my father. Oil on canvas, soft background of a lake he once liked to visit. The frame was plain, no title. It went up beside the plaque without announcement. Declan arrived halfway through the ceremony. He stood in the back, wearing a jacket that didn't match his pants and shoes with cracked soles. No one stopped him, but no one really greeted him either. I walked past him on my way to the stage. He didn't speak. I didn't stop. After the final speech, I slipped out before the closing toast. There was no point staying longer. I drove to the other end of town, to a fenced-off construction site where floodlights glowed and steel beams rose from poured concrete. The Future Innovation Hub sat on land my firm had purchased last year. We were leading the design, engineering, and infrastructure systems. It would host startups, job training centers, and co-working offices by spring. I stood by the gate watching the crew lower a steel frame into place. 10 years ago, I had nothing but a friend's couch, a borrowed laptop, and a list of things I couldn't afford. Now I stood on property I owned, overseeing a project built from the ground up by the company I created. Declan was never destroyed, but every corner he used to stand on, it belonged to me now.